The quick version of what I'm going to try to do here today is show you a lot more information than I should be able to show you in an hour. So I hope you can grab as much information from what you see as possible, and the instruction sheet and my email address is on it, and go back and try to experiment with this if you're interested, and feel free to ask me as many questions as you want to ask me as you experience this on your own. I've done a few things. The first thing I should say is I lost all my original images I'd set up for this workshop because my CD broke in the airplane on the way out here. And so I've spent a good deal of time attempting to manipulate images I had with me to create the samples I wanted to show you in the workshop. And so I have done that in a way that will allow me to show you. However, the images are a little bit pixelated, which, if my computer will come back, you can see they're awful. They've been compressed an awful lot. Plus, the projector is compressing them as it digitizes it to show up. So, forgive the image quality, and if you could forgive that, focus on the ideas behind the process, and I think you'll still be impressed with the process I used to take one image of this moose head and turn it into a stereo pair, which then I turn into an anaglyph and some other things that I'll show at the end. And since I know somebody has to leave early, I'm going to go ahead and first show you a quick little presentation I worked on at about 1 o'clock this morning. Welcome, sorry. All right, sorry. What this is a series of 26 pictures that show you the steps I used to create the layers necessary to create a second image for the stereo pair. And I'll go back through it after I show it to you once, assuming I can find it. Okay, everyone see? And am I loud enough for everybody to hear? What this is the original image, which is a slightly better compression than the ones after, since I had to save it multiple times. And the very first thing I did was mask out the area on the image, and this is very subjective, the area on the image that I believe would be closest to me, and cut it out of the image, and then blended everything that had a right face. Yeah, I'll step up here to show you. Instead of just having the jagged edge of the area that I masked and cut out of the image, I used a blending tool to copy in the contents of whatever it was that was next to the area I cut out. And that's a very tedious manual process, because you want to make sure that if there's an angle or a line or a combination of colors that come to a point at an area you've cut out, you want to make sure that you blend that in the right direction to maintain whatever that line was, because you're actually creating new information in the stereo pair that wasn't there originally. It doesn't matter that it has a rough edge, because when I paste back the information I just cut out, I'm going to put it back exactly where I cut it and move it over 1 pixel, and only allow 1 pixel of the information I just blended to remain in the new image. I'll show you that in a second here. The idea is you have to create all of the missing information that would have been recorded by the second lens of a stereo camera. So there's actually more information down the right side of whatever it is you photograph than what the left image captures, if you treat your 2D image as your left image. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So I blend, I paste back, I mask out. In addition to the original mask area, that's the one thing this show won't show you, is the masks, and I'll show you those once we get to the next step. I mask out the next level of what I would say would be further away from me.
So that's including the first part that you already...
Including the first part. You do that over and over and over so that
It's just
it,
getting bigger and
it
bigger.
continually moves. Right. So now I've blended that. I paste back in. I do a slightly larger mask. I blend. I paste back. A larger mask. I blend. I paste back. A larger mask. I blend and I paste back.
So if you use a phrase like 20-layer conversion, is each of these masks which
A
we
layer.
consider to be a layer?
Correct. I will tell you, again, because this wasn't a high quality image. 2, because I'd been up for about 20 hours. And so on. You can imagine all the excuses. I didn't do as many layers on this image as I would have. I would have done this with a very high resolution image, probably 4 or 5 million pixels minimum. 4,000 across, then minimum maybe. Huge to start. And I probably would have done 25 different layers in this image, and I've only done, or I would have probably done 35, and I've only done about 20 for this example. So there are places where you're going to see some of the obvious layers because I kind of wanted to stretch the 3D, and well, you'll see that when we get to the end. But this isn't exactly the way I would have done it. I did put a couple images in the middle here to show you when I paste back the area I cut out, it lays it on top of the image that's there, and this is what you see, and you have to use your arrow keys or your mouse to move it around finally until you get it exactly where it's supposed to go.
So you only need to blend on the right side because that's where the...
Right. The information on the left gets
It's
covered
just
when
gonna
you move it
cover
over
up.
1 pixel.
Okay.
Which half of the pair are we creating as
Right.
we're doing the right side?
Yes. We start with the left, and by moving everything to the left from the right and adding right information, we're creating the right pair. So I cut out a larger mask, I blend again, I paste. I cut out a larger mask, I blend again, and I paste. And I cut out a larger mask, and I blend again, and I paste. And like I said, I probably would have done more layers. But I would have gone down that hallway in the distance. This was enough. So, in the end, you end up with, and can everyone here free view? Can anyone here free view?
Only cross-site.
This was the original. And this was the original copy I made that I started to edit. And then you can see the steps I used to get to the last image, which would be my new right. And what I want to do here quick to show you the difference is what we did in the Anaglyph workshop for a minute. I'm going to paste this and use this transparency tool to show you what happens. You see how there's extra nose information and there's slightly more information between, for example, watch this point right here, or watch this point on the flag, or watch this wall here, and notice that from one to the next. There's some blurring and some fading, but you have information presented that wasn't there before. See that? So, that leaves you with a stereo pair. If you can view this, or I suppose I could jump ahead and show you an Anaglyph I made with it. Again, the compression on this is pretty extreme, so forgive the quality of it. But you can see, like I said, I made it an extreme conversion because I wanted to dramatize the effect coming through the window. So,
Then a question.
yes.
A little too much.
When you
Yes.
start with your first layer, do you incrementally increase more or decrease more the number of pixels that you get in?
It's a good question. In this example,
Could you repeat the question?
the question was, once you've masked and cut out and pasted back the first layer, do you add or change the number of pixels you shift as you go back layers? Is that a good wording for it? In other words, if I move the first layer 1 pixel to the left? Am I interested in changing the next one 2 pixels and so on? And the answer to that is, if the image content was shot at an odd angle, for example, down onto a baby, where you might have a different depth perception than normal, instead of straight on in a pair. I have had occasions where there's been benefit to changing the depth at different layers. That's sort of a trick answer because, like everything else within 2D to 3D conversions, it's very subjective. You may do it and find out you've ended up with a hyper view that it shouldn't have been hyper. Most often, 1 pixel per layer is enough. You just have to make sure you add enough layers, front to back, to provide a smooth image. I could go through here and do 10 layers at 2 pixels each, and have what most of us have seen as 2D to 3D conversions, which look like someone took a piece of paper and cut out pieces and then layered them, so you have pancakes laying one on top of the other.
So in your case, in your case, you generally use 1 pixel at a time?
Generally 1 pixel.
And average of about 30 layers?
Yes.
How long does it take you to make a conversion?
This sample, which is phenomenally poor quality and only because of the emergency of having to present it, still took me probably 4.5 hours. I did some images. I have this up here and I'll show it to anybody who wants to see it later. Earlier this year, and I've shared them on the internet, I did some conversions for a high school in Atlanta for their yearbook. And I just got it last week, and I am tickled pink. They look amazing. So far better than I would have expected. And I'd love to show them to you. And the trick about conversions is, in my opinion, to be under-dramatic about it. Make it look real, don't make it look 3D. Stay away from the spears coming through the window kind of thing. Don't do this with the nose. Keep it a little more...
So it wouldn't be unusual if you spend the whole day converting an image?
Yes. At first when I saw, I'll be right there. At first when I saw prices people were charging for conversion services once they started showing up on the web, I thought they were out of their minds. And then I did them. And the reality is, if you want it done well, and anyone can do this if you have the patience, you're going to spend a lot of time on it. Because it's a lot of meticulous work. It's especially the masking part of it, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. You have to zoom in 500, 700, 1200% until you get down to someone's nose being this big on the screen, so that you make sure you only capture their nose to cut it out to then blend. And then you've got to go in at that level and do the blending at a very minute level. You don't want to come in with a big tool and just take half their cheek and fill it in, because you'll wipe out the cheek. You need to leave the original detail while you blend in the area you're going to need that extra pixel. And the more careful you are, the more realistic it looks at the end. The one thing about the layers, to go back to that 1 pixel thing as well, that's important to remember is you don't want a cookie cutter look. And so you need to make sure that when you sit down to start one of these, you don't stop. Or if you do stop, take very careful notes about the last thing you did. Because when you come back, you've got to pick up from exactly that point and not screw up something in the middle and then ruin everything you've done up to that point. You can't save your work. You can do incremental saves, but you can't save it and reopen it and continue working, because your masks have to be there. And you can try saving your masks, but I can tell you right now, you're going to have problems with that as well. So say you do 3 hours one evening. You need to leave your computer there. Pray no one else messes with them until you come back the next time and continue on. So it's a labor-intensive and fairly stressful thing. But the rewards are amazing. If you take a picture that's extremely important to your family that was taken 2D and you want to make a 3D pair out of it, it is possible. There are images, of course, a group of people in a tree with 100 leaves hanging in front of them that you don't want to mess with. If you're going to have to do 400 layers, chances of it being realistic when you're done are pretty slim. But if it's a straight subject and there aren't twigs or sticks or arms or fingers in front, close, you're going to be okay. So your subject matter is going to limit it a little bit.
Well, for that
When you make a stereo slide, you mount them differently if they're close up or if they're far away.
Right.
Did you change your pixel movement if close up is against a far away shot?
It's conceivable. If you have a macro that doesn't have much depth, it's just a lot of high detail and magnification, you might want to do 2 pixels per jump. You're just going to have to experiment with that. It just depends how much information you have to start with, how deep you want the image to be in the end, and you'll have to play with it to see what works for you.
Have you found any lift out programs to use any advantage, like Corel Knockout or anything like that? Have you tried those?
I have not tried that program. The one reason I'm going to say, without having used that program, that I wouldn't recommend it is, it's important to keep the sequence of masking, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute, where you draw your first mask and do your work with it, and then add to that mask. It's very important to keep that sequence in order and intact, because you have to move everything you've moved before, including the area you've just blended, every time in order to keep from having that cookie cutout feel. And I wish I had my sample just to show you a bad conversion so you could see exactly what I'm talking about if you haven't seen one before. But the idea is, in the end, you want to have something that resembles a stereo pair and is enough to fool your brain into believing that it's seeing 2 solid 3-dimensional images, or 2-dimensional images and combining it into a solid 3-dimensional image. If there are layers or inconsistencies, your brain is going to pick them out quickly. If you've ever looked at one of those comics in the newspaper where you have to find what's different, have you ever seen those?
Yes.
Cross-eye them once. You'll amaze people because instantly you're going to go, there, and there.
Yeah.
Your brain is unkind to things that are different, and in here they become especially apparent.
There's
That's another
another
reason.
method that avoids these masking layers. That's the displacement map in Photoshop. And that works very well, but you still have to spend a lot of time
lot of
constructing the right displacement map and then move the right image to the proper distance left or right.
And it's actually, I think, much more difficult to do it that way. Another thing that Photoshop lets you do is it lets you define areas of a particular picture as actual layers. And then you can move them and then have to go in behind each one and do the blending. The problem with that is you don't have that consistent movement front to back, because you then become tempted to go down to the 4th layer and nudge it. Well,
No, you don't have to go into separate layers. You make a displacement map which moves, for example, the face of the moose. This is displaced uniformly and forward by just putting a shift on the displacement map.
I've seen them. I've seen them work quite well. I'm not saying that that's not a viable.
Yeah, it's still a lot of work. though.
I'm also kind of coming back to, and I didn't start out with that with this one. With the Anaglyph workshop, I wanted to come up with a set of instructions that would be doable in most any program. Not something as high-powered as Photoshop, which everyone doesn't have. And to give you some of the basic ideas and skills so that you can go experiment. There are certainly a lot of wonderful things in Photoshop, and there are things I'm not even touching on, even in this old program I'm using, that allow you to do things like take your whole image and skew it. So if you had a landscape shot of the ocean, you could skew the whole thing, and it would do the work for you, reasonably. So you could do a conversion on the person standing in the foreground and do the whole background and just skew it, and you wouldn't have to do 18 more layers. You would do it all at once. But that goes kind of beyond where I was here, where I wanted to be in this workshop, because like I said, I wanted you to have enough information to go back and start experimenting, and then build from there and ask questions from there. Do you have another question?
Yeah, there's no reason to go.
How important do you find it to be viewing what you're doing in stereo as you're going? Do you try to somehow view the pair either as an anaglyph or with a viewer at each step, or is that not crucial?
When I first started doing them, I would, at every junction point where I pasted back and shifted a pixel, go back and free view the pair. But I found that what I was doing was working and didn't need to do that, and it was an extra distraction. So if you stick to the 1 pixel shift throughout, it's just a matter of getting through the tediousness, and in the end you'll have what you wanted anyway.
Now, if you have an image that perhaps has a family standing together, and then the Alps are in the distance, is that a case where you might, by the time you got done with the family and got over to the Alps, would you maybe then do a
Good question.
greater number of pixel shift?
Very good question. And in fact, that's how some of these ones in the yearbook are. There's the kids are standing in a parking lot, and there's trees 20 car lengths behind them. And so I may have done 22 layers to get their noses and cheeks and the rest of their face, and then their ears and hair and shoulders and whatnot, and then the kids behind them. So I had a bunch of layers to provide accurate detail on them, and then there's really no more information for 20 car lengths. And so where these may have all been 1 pixel shifts, that last one, and I don't remember exactly, may have been 7 or 8. And in that case, I did want to go do a preview. I would do the paste, shift it over 7, and then do a quick preview and say, that's too much or too little, and move it again until I was comfortable with what I was seeing. When it was 1 by 1 by 1 by 1, I knew what I was doing wasn't going to be something I needed to judge. But then, once it was a large increment for space, I needed to make sure the volume appeared appropriate to me and didn't create so much disparity between them and the trees so as to create ghosting when they made an anaglyph, if you know what you want to do in the end. So, any other questions?
And when you're creating your mask, are you trying to simulate layers of the depth of the picture
Correct.
itself?
It requires a good bit of imagination. And it also requires you to be extremely careful, because if you forget something, you can't go back and fix it. If you leave out a flower that's down here in the lower left-hand corner, you're going to be far better off blending it out of the picture because you haven't been moving it at the appropriate layer with the other images, and getting it to move appropriately at the end is very difficult.
I was wondering if you do some pre-touching of the photo in the beginning. For example, the original photo has a styrofoam cup laying in the parking lot. Or
Get rid of it.
So you get rid of that first.
Sure. I did one antique pair. I'm about 80% happy with the result, and I think I'm probably going to do it again, of my grandparents. It's an early photo of them. And it had some creases and some fade spots. And I did an awful lot of correction first. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to make a pair for them and make a stereo card. That'll be their Christmas present this year. That's when I think one of the neatest things. You create memories that never existed. Or add to the memories that they have. So it's kind of fun.
I
Yes.
think the same concept is used if you want to do drawings and cartoons. I mean, would it be easier to start with a cartoon because it's real simple? You're just dealing with maybe general colors and lines and layer that. Would that be an easier way to start? Or cartoons entirely different?
I found them to be different. I found that I am nowhere near as successful with them because in an image like this, you have color sets, patterns, and groupings of colors that when you blend, your brain is willing to accept that. When it's a straight line, when you have to move it over a pixel, you end up having a jag in that line. And getting that to skew appropriately is far more difficult. And I have a lot more respect for people like Ray Zone and some of the other guys.
I can address that because I did the logo this year at the convention, and my first attempt looked like a bunch of pancakes sitting on top, because I tried to do it myself, like doing exactly what you suggested. So I just emailed Ray Zone a gloriously high resolution attachment and said, can you help us out? And he did it again. So cartooning is a whole different ballgame.
I would think that once you get that jagged line, that you would just then redraw that line and replace that jagged line with what you now know.
Yeah, me too. That's what I thought.
Well, in some cases, that is what happens. Some stereo drawings are actually, they create an original and then they draw a second one separate for it. It's not necessarily conversion, but they draw a separate one that actually changes the perspective of things. But in the case of conversions of comic art, for example, you do end up going into tools that allow you to change more about the image than just its physical position into the plane. You actually skew it a little bit, and there's a whole lot more involved.
Are you going to walk us through these?
Yes. Any other questions?
So there's no software that particularly does this. I know
No.
that question comes up all the time on the list, and it really isn't.
No. And I've tried to say no on the email list when people say that there's got to be something, and I say, in reality, there isn't. You've got your brain, and I think Ray Zone wrote a wonderful article about the best piece of software to do this is your brain, because it's 70% creativity.
I keep scratching that.
Okay. And when I say I'm going to walk you through it, I'm actually going to I'm going to go through a variety of things. The first is I'm going to show you what I mean by masks. In this case, I saved several of them as I was going through the process, so I could pull them back up without having to redraw them. And you can see on this image that this was the very first mask I chose to place. Now, it's like I said, it's an arbitrary thing. And everyone in this room may not agree with me that that much of the nose and that part of the antlers should be on the same plane. But, again, I was kind of in a hurry and it was late. There they were. You have to make that decision. I could also have made a mask that was the entire moose, shifted it 3 pixels, and called it a 3D picture. You'd have a flat moose on top of a flat background. We've all seen pictures like that, haven't we? So, I have this, and I'm going to walk you through the quick version of one layer of this conversion. I cut that out using the cut or edit, cut, and I've removed it into memory. It's sitting out here somewhere in the hard drive. And I get rid of the mask, which doesn't, in every piece of software I've used, removing the mask doesn't get rid of the mask. I used the wrong word. I'm just removing it from the picture for the moment, and I can replace it. Now I want to go in here, and this is where you're really going to see that this is a JPEG that's been compressed. On a normal image at this resolution, you would still have a fair amount of clarity. And I'm going to use a tool. It's a blending tool. And I'm going to go down to a fairly small size. So my brush is small, and I'm going to start blending the surrounding information into the right side of the area I just pasted from.
And you really only need to get 1 pixel's worth.
I really only need 1 pixel's worth. However, since I keep this thing on a, what they call a feather setting, where it blends for me, instead of being a harsh copy, I go a few pixels beyond to make sure I get what I really want.
How are you deciding what the color is? Are you capturing the color that's there?
I'm not deciding. I'm actually taking what you see here, and by pushing down on the mouse, I'm saying, now grab that
color
and blend it into this area for me. And you'll see it does that. It'll blend to white eventually because I start to hit into white area. But you see how it blends the colors in? And the only thing I'm interested in is the very first pixel. So right, let me go back to this pixel right here is the only one that's going to show up once I paste back and move over. So if it gets lighter beyond that, I don't necessarily care. I just want to make sure that that pixel and the one next to it are close enough that when it fills in the gap that's created by my cut and paste, it matches the 2 pixels that it's between. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not going to do this to the whole area. I'm just going to do this one piece. I don't have to mess with that whole side of it because when I paste back and move over, I'm actually going to cover 1 pixel of the other image. I'm going to hide the background, which is what happens in a pair.
When you talk about moving over 2 pixels, you go into and bring it out then?
Correct. I would want to make sure I had enough information copied over in this blend to allow coverage of the 2 pixels I would need, or 8, or however much.
When you say you only do the right side, say that center section, where would you stop blending on that center section?
I would do it from here.
Okay.
I've got to do this one.
Okay.
And in this case, I'm going to make sure I pull up into the image, and I'm doing extra, but I don't want to blend the white into the area that's still going to be showing to the left of it. And I would do all of this, and I would do all the way up to here, and I would pull this down diagonally to make sure I don't mess with that top edge.
And so you want to use the maximum feathering so that when you're pasting in, it's giving you a little bit of slack?
A little bit of slack, absolutely. Slack is a good thing.
Well, you can't do too much feathering, can you? I mean, it's just a waste of time, but it doesn't do anything to the picture.
Right, you can. Here's a place where you want to be careful. This happens to be the edge of the hallway roof behind the moose. I want to make sure when I blend this, I don't soften it too much, and I did in the other example. But if I'm going to pull this in a pixel, I got to make very, very, very certain I don't do what I just did, number one. Undo is a wonderful thing. just pull that up into that area a little bit and not mess with the original too much, so that I've extended that roof line into the area that I'm going to paste back to. So I've done some pasting. I'm not going to do all, or blending. I'm not going to do all of it. I'm just now going to paste back the image I cut out and move it around with the arrows, very carefully placing it exactly back where it originally was. And now, for example, right there where the arrow is, where I just blended, when I move this to the left 1 pixel, you'll see the roof just naturally extends, but the areas I haven't blended yet are now open. I'm going to go ahead and leave it 1, because you see over there, you see the area that would have been behind that part of the image. Again, at a higher resolution image, this would be that much clearer. So you've lied about what's really there.
Now, the higher your resolution, the smaller a 1 pixel movement is that right? Like
Correct.
if you have a 4000 dpi
Right.
image, you're still moving by 1 pixel even if it's like a big high.
It depends on the result you're trying to achieve. A few of these images I did for the yearbook, I probably did 2 or 3, depending on how large the original was. And you're going to have to try each one, see what works for it, and then apply that across the board. Do one layer and see how it looks. Is it not enough or is it too much? Make your decision and then go back and start over from your original, make a new one, and go and apply that particular formula.
So would it be easier to just apply the layer on top, shift it over 1 pixel, and fill in the white space?
Conceivably. I have done that in a few instances. I found that I was sloppier that way though, and I ended up blurring too much of the original. To explain a way to do that. Right now I'll go back in here and zoom. I've got white areas that I don't really want, but I move it back. I did move it back. Sorry, hang on a minute. Say I had just pasted and I realized there was one whole little area I missed. That's the original. Now there's white areas. Oh, I'm sorry, this is going to work because I didn't remove the mask first. Hang on a minute. I'm going to paste it back. Move it over a pixel. All right. Once I've done that, it's going to mask the area I've just done, but leave the white pixels outside. I can go up here to my mask control and invert it. And by inverting it, instead of having all of these things selected, I've now selected the rest of the image and not them. And I can do what you just suggested and blend from here to the white spot, and it's going to ignore what I just pasted. It's backwards of what I just did.
Huh.
It's essentially the same thing. I'm sorry?
You know the lines that are highlighted right now?
Yeah.
Photoshop, you can highlight so that you can see how...
Not in this particular application, but yes, you can. As long as you make sure they're still there and they protect the image you don't want to be blending into. That's another way you could fill in the movements and be maybe even a little more meticulous. It's the same thing, a different way.
Dan, a question. I missed the beginning of this. Are you looking at this in either parallel across to you as you're doing this? Is it a side-by-side process where you can monitor as you go?
Yes.
Okay.
You start with an original, make a copy,
Right.
save it with a different name, and then start editing that.
Right.
And at any
you always
point...
try to keep your changes on, say, the picture on the right side if you're doing
I do.
across view?
You could do it the other way.
Yeah.
You could make a left image and do everything from the left. The instructions I wrote are from the right. Whether you do one or the other doesn't matter at this point. One thing that is important is once you're done with your conversion, say you had 30 layers.
Right.
Every time you touch the right side, if you did that in 12 of those, the last 12 of those layers, because of items that actually began to hit the edge of your window, when it's all said and done, you're going to have an incrementally growing area of white space that's going to be up to 12 pixels wide on that side of the image. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to have to retrim your images once this is all said and done. And not just the one you just edited and created, you then have to make the window on the other one match. Most often, you'll have created an image that breaks the window tremendously because you moved everything to the right and pulled it out of the window as you moved it, it grows out. And so you'll have to trim it back to pull your image back into the stereo window and trim the left image accordingly. If that doesn't make sense to you, that's sort of beyond the scope of this, and I'll be glad to show you that. Come by as soon as we can.
Well, once again, I wasn't here at the
That's fine.
beginning, but you're getting that white area where the pixels are removed. Now, I do conversions in Photoshop where I just move everything from the left image to the right image and layer it, and I never have anything to paint out. I mean,
Right.
you just paint out the artifacts of those things that didn't get covered as a cleanup thing. Now, what is the advantage of saving things to the hard drive in these layers or masks that you're doing?
Well, the big generic answer to that is it helps to avoid pancaking. What I call pancaking, other people call pancaking, where you have very distinct and obvious layers in your conversion. Doing it in this method, where you start at the front layer and continue to add to your mask and move the entire image that's masked every time.
Right.
And I'll go back and show you the little animation at the end again. Helps you to make sure you have a smooth incremental change from one layer to the next.
Yeah.
And in the end, it looks like rounded things appear to be rounded and so forth.
Right.
And you don't have that pancake layer.
If you were doing it in Photoshop, you could use the blur tool to go between the two layers
Right.
and just touch it up that way.
Yeah.
You just
And I've
scale
seen
up
those
that
done.
works good.
There are a multitude of ways to do conversions. This is the way I've found to make the most photorealistic conversions possible. There may be a better way. I haven't found it. But I wanted to pass it along to anybody else who's interested. So.
I'd just like to follow up on his idea. It seems to me that if you make a copy of what you're moving and just copy it to another layer in Photoshop, then move it in a layer over, you don't have to worry about covering up the white spots because they would.
That's correct.
But you never get the information that way.
But you also end up with distinct flat levels. You end up with a 3D image that has a series of flat levels. And when you blend it, you have the potential to blend more than the one pixel you blend using this method.
Yeah, but
You lose sharpness. And it ends up looking more like a conversion than a stereo pair.
What would be the advantage cost of doing it the way you're suggesting?
Ease. It would be faster. It wouldn't look as good. Let me take a break and show you a couple images here.
Well, I can see that the way you do it by taking away, momentarily not having the foreground visible, is you're definitely pulling the background forward. Not, like if you just used a blend tool like somebody else suggested, you can introduce the foreground stuff into the background that you
Right. And you can also, even between one little layer, you could blend so much that your eye will notice a disparity from one image to the other, and it'll be much harder to believe it as a true stereo pair, especially if you're using high-res images that you're going to turn into actual photographs. When you put it under magnification in a stereo viewer, it's really going to become apparent. And so that's what I was attempting to avoid. I'm not saying that's not a valuable way to do it. It's just, it's not as photorealistic in the end. Go ahead.
Even though it would be twice as much work, would it make any sense to work on both images? Going left on one, right on the other?
I have actually attempted that. And the quick and dirty answer for me is no. If you assume one was taken by a stereo camera and you work to make the second to match it, you end up with an effective stereo pair. If you modify both, then you've introduced a certain amount of blending into both on both sides of the image, and you have that much more potential for an area that might look incorrect. And it doesn't add anything to the 3D effect. As long as you trim your images at the end.
Yeah, could I suggest something?
Yes.
That if you divide, let's say, a figure into left and right side, if you consistently stay in one mode all the way through until you finish one edge of the main subject, then you can save it. And I'm speaking in Photoshop because I don't know the software, but then you can save it, put it away, make a duplicate of that so you don't screw it up, and then work on the other side, because you can cut out 1 or 2 pixels to the left or the right of something very easily, and you can move it over and it fits. And that way the whole the whole scene can be moved in successive layers as you get either deeper or closer, and you just carve it out 1 or 2 pixels and then move it, and then you take the whole area, and as you get closer to the camera, the things that you're outlining get smaller and smaller. But the advantage it is that you're able to either preview or parallel view everything at every stage in stereo, and there isn't anything to cover up. The program automatically covers up once you flatten it or you close out the outline.
Sure.
It goes away, and so you have a free view or cross view pair at all times. So that's it seems like a simpler way in that you're not putting stuff into a file. It's always right on the desktop.
Right. I'm not saying that that's not a simpler way. I would love to see your work.
I'm presenting at 2 o'clock, and I have a couple of conversions.
Having not seen your work, I can say everybody else's work that's been done in similar fashion has not been satisfactory to me.
Yeah.
And that's why I brought this up, to show you at least some grayscale versions of some of the anaglyphs I've created using this method, to see if you might agree that these look as if they were taken by a stereo camera. There are little tweaks in them, but if everyone has anaglyph glasses, I don't know if you do or not, there's a couple extras if you don't.
We had extra anaglyph glasses.
Yeah, I can just.
Okay, that's out of you.
Thanks.
The first thing I'm going to do is show you a very large file so you can see some of the detail. Actually, I'll do that last. I'm just going to quick go through these once everyone has their glasses.
How many did you do for this year?
I did 16 and they used 12.
You must have spent quite a lot of time.
Too much. And I agreed to do it originally, and it taught me a lot of things, and I'll never do it again.
Is this your alma mater or something?
No, they found me on the internet and contacted me, and didn't have a whole lot of budget, and
they wanted to do a 3D?
Yeah.
Wow. Where'd they get that idea?
I have no idea. And there's the covers in 3D, and kids had fun. And I at the time, I think we needed to fix something, or we had to buy some rocks for the backyard. We bought a new house last year, so we had extra
So you
expenses.
made about $2 an hour.
They kind of waved some stuff in front of me, and it wasn't a lot of money, but it was a way to get it. So here we go.
Wow.
I'm just going to kind of walk you through them. Remember, sorry, this is coded for the web. These are compressed versions of these files, so they're not as good as the originals were, the high-resolution ones. But I was pretty happy with the fact that I was able to end up with things that looked like they came out of a stereo camera. And I'll show you on the large one that I did 5 or 6 layers on faces. These noses are in front of these cheeks, and eyebrows are higher than the eyes. And it's all little things that you can't see right now, but your brain accepts the overall picture as being that much more real.
So those are 1 pixel movements, and how wide are the pixels of the image?
These are probably more like 2 or 3 pixel images. 2 or 3 pixel
I mean,
images.
how many pixels were you dealing with? Like a 1500 pixel one?
Oh, no. This was probably more like 8 or 9,000.
Oh, okay. So like very high resolution.
Very high resolution. Because they had to go back and be printed. This is the one I'm going to show you a larger version of. One place you can see where I got lazy and tired of this image is right back here. You see the cookie cutout? I only did 2 layers on the roof because I didn't care. I was done. And the reality is that's not where you're going to look first. You can go look for it if you want to look for it. But you're going to look at the kids, and the kids are going to look at the kids. And I
They're
did
not
the
going
kids
to care.
Right. But getting this railing, for example, to appear appropriate, layer by layer by layer, was quite a challenge. And if I had to blend too much, I would have lost detail, and it would have made it look fuzzy.
Do you remember how many layers this one was?
This is probably the one that had the most, I would say at least 35. Maybe 40. I'd have to go back and look at the original stuff.
Is that because of the diagonal lines?
The diagonal legs presented quite a challenge. There's another one here like that, but also required a good number of layers. And again, I'm very pleased that I was able to get their legs to look that, to me, realistic. I'm talking about my own work, so forgive me if I brag a little. This was probably the toughest one because what do you do with people laying on the floor? Their noses are exaggerated. I made it. Yeah, well, I made things exaggerated and hyper because I had to introduce something that was of some depth. And if you come look at the yearbook, you'll see the way they use this image, and I think it's probably the most successful one in here. They cropped it with a star. It's a beautiful image.
It wouldn't be as interesting if it were guys.
Absolutely.
You wouldn't need as many layers, that's for sure.
This is another one of the ones where there was a major change between the last layer. Between here and the trees back there, I would guess probably about a 5-pixel shift. And then I did another one with the telephone poles.
So you probably had to work very carefully to fill in your 5 empty pixels.
It was much more difficult because I had to blend them and make it look realistic. And then I pulled the telephone poles out 1 pixel from the rest of the background and maybe some edge of details in the trees to kind of add some depth to it.
You know, I just have to say this. I teach kids all the time. They probably have no sense of what you did.
Actually, you'd be surprised.
Okay, because if you shared with them some of the process, directly with them, I'm sure that they would appreciate that.
Oh yeah, they were. These yearbooks cost $150 a piece. And I originally asked them if I could get one, if I could buy it, because this is the first time some of this has been done for me, and I'd like to get one. And at first they said, we don't have enough, and we can't even tell you what. But once they got the images, I got thank you letters from 4 of the students, the director, then one from the principal of the school, and then they sent me 2 copies of the book. So I do think they appreciate.
That answers my question about being able to buy a copy of this.
I had to spend a lot of time on the phone with them and with the printers to explain what they needed to do to get it.
Dan, you got
You have
one
a
battery.
requester box.
Oh, I brought the plug, but I didn't plug it in. Why don't I do that?
How does that work?
That is,
Excuse me 1 second.
they're gonna wish they made 1,000.
Any chance these guys might buy a stereo camera and do this again?
And believe me, that was the first conversation.
No, but seriously, if they really like doing this, it would be great to interest them in getting a stereo camera.
Well, the thing that I found interesting is the company that does the yearbooks is interested in doing it.
Good.
But it's been very cost prohibitive, the little bit of research they've done. So
I bet the guy that printed this was interested now in having more copies made, right?
maybe.
When he saw it, actually, the real business will be in reunion.
That would be interesting.
High school reunion.
Dan, can I point out something, that your figures are so well registered that if they were in front of a wall, you could pass that off as a regular yearbook illustration. So that's an embedded image where it's dual purpose. In other words, without the forest in the background, those kids really, they wouldn't need the glasses to appreciate a nice picture.
That's true.
So it's a dual purpose other than the background.
And the way that, if you come look at it, the way they're in here, they did the true color, so they're a little purple, but they look realistic even without the glasses. You put the glasses on and then you have the depth of the page. It's kind of nice.
Photographer took these pictures of these kids. Did
Yeah.
he know that
No.
these pictures would be manipulated? Did he post them?
No.
No,
Not at all.
And
And the only reason
Since all of these girls have their legs sticking out,
There goes Dan's whole
it's like a chorus line sort of
they're
photo.
slightly boring photos from a 3D perspective.
5,000.
But from a yearbook perspective, they're important because in here you're seeing each of the classes, the freshmen, the sophomores, and the juniors, and the seniors. And that's part of how they presented it at the beginning of each of those sections.
Now, see that
They already
guy,
had the images, they already picked them out, and they'd already laid them into the yearbook before they decided to convert it. So I didn't have a whole lot of choice. They sent me the images, and actually a few of them I said, there's no way. There's the tree thing with the leaves in front of people. I said, I can't do that.
that guy second from the left would have made a great cover shot, with the expression on
Yeah,
his
the look.
face, that Harold Lloyd kind of look.
Well, actually, I like another one here even more because
So Dan, next year they're gonna use a realist?
next year they're gonna, if they do it again, they're gonna buy a camera.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it. This was the toughest one because how do you do that? And why are they doing that?
Because they're at 17.
They're kids.
Seemed like a
yeah.
good idea at the time.
16.
But, yeah, one more, and then I'll show you the big one.
They look very natural.
Okay, so here's a very large file that we can scroll around. Again, you can look at the roof there and see the cookie cutter thing going on.
Yeah.
And if you look at their noses, for example, you're going to see that I've exaggerated things like the hair and the nose and the cheeks, specifically to provide more information for your brain to register to and accept it as a real image. When you get to this kind of resolution, though, you can see that this is not correct.
Right. Yeah.
There's a cookie cutter kind of a thing going on right there. See it? Barely, kind of, sort of. But you can get an idea for some of the layers. Between this one that's obvious and that one that's obvious, I might have had 3 or 4 more that were just 1 pixels that I did a pretty decent job on. But if you look closely for them, and that's the reason I provided this, was to show the amount of layering that was involved.
But you're clever in terms of using the creases in the code.
And you can even see there's a cookie cutter thing happening. And I did try to use creases to hide things.
Do you remember how long it took you to do this specific one?
Too much time. No, I didn't.
Dan, we have a few moments to go back and show a transition from the first layer to the second layer.
Sure. To go back to this one, before we do that, some of the areas we were just looking at where there was some problems. There's the 2 layers on the leg. Now that you know they're there, you can look for them.
Yeah, you can see it. Yeah, it sticks out.
Well, and that's telltale that it's a conversion, but if you look at the image as a whole and you look at their faces, yeah, it works. And I probably could have spent more time, but this is maybe one of the ones I was doing towards the end, realizing that I've been working for free for about 25 hours. Or 40 hours or something. Okay, so, how are we doing on time? Oh, we're out of time. Let's go back and do something quick then. You wanted to see how I would go from 1 to 2? I actually saved all those steps, so.
You can have anybody after you, Dan.
Okay. And for those of you that use Photoshop, I'll say it again, it's not that I'm discouraging Photoshop use, it's that most people don't have it, and most people aren't going to buy it. And so I'm trying to give a set of instructions that are usable in just about any application. You can certainly then go experiment with Photoshop and go from there and do other things. I will go ahead and open up a little sequence here and go all the way to a 3rd layer, which are of course backwards now. And I'll walk you through the sequence. This is the original flat image, to which I would have added a mask. And instead of drawing it, I'm just going to add it. That's the mask. I then did the cut command, which removed the image information. I then removed the mask, and I blended. I'm going to zoom in here so you can see that. So the edges are blended in. I then pasted the information back in and shifted it 1 pixel, like I showed earlier. Put the mask back on and added another layer to it. So I went from that mask to, I'm sorry, I skipped one.
How do you add another layer to it?
Okay, good question. Use a masking tool. Either use the point-to-point drawing tool or whatever. You can use the paintbrush. There's a variety of different tools to add masks. And just pick the area you want to mask. And this isn't necessarily correct, I'm just showing you. That's what I wanted. And just add it back in. I completely screwed that up, man. But it'll attach it to the other mask if you overlap. I don't know. So make it nice and ugly there. But see how I'm adding to the mask size?
A mask is the same thing as a selection?
Not always. It depends on what your program uses to define this. In this case, I'm defining an area, so it's not necessarily selecting an area. In some applications, the selection will actually pick based on a color or a gradation of colors. Here, I'm just defining an area. So,
Dan, could I suggest something, please?
yes.
Well, people have the objects outlined. If you're using something like Photoshop, maybe PhotoSuite, I don't know that program, but you can, where you know you're going to converge, like where you're like within 1 pixel of convergence on the
Right.
subject, it's a good idea to go into your unsharp mask tool and goose up the apparent sharpness a little bit. It tends to make like points of horns and things like that look more real if you got a real sharp edge to the picture for that area.
Can you do this before you start converting? You go into...
Well, once you take the trouble to outline it, you can do a number of things. You can make gradient luminance changes if it's going to make it look better. But you got to do the same thing on both sides. You got to be careful, otherwise you're going to rival it. But tips of horns or anything pointy, if you sharpen it, it just gives you that little extra zing.
Little detail.
Yeah.
Okay, so I blend, and I've lost 3. Oh, there it is. I paste back in. I enlarge the mask and cut out. I blend again, paste back in, shift another pixel. And I did that repeatedly, adding to it every time. And I'll go back and show the little movie I showed at the beginning, the little presentation. And I'll walk you through each of those steps. It's a little easier to see this way. Now that you've seen some things, hopefully this will make more sense than it did last time. Start with the original. Mask and cut away and blend. Paste back and shift the pixel. Larger mask, cut away, blend, paste back and shift the pixel. Slightly larger mask again, cut away, blend, paste back and move a pixel. Larger again, blend, paste back and move a pixel. And so on. And this is where I showed you the adjustment to getting in the right place and moving it over. Larger mask, cut, blend, paste. Larger mask, cut, blend, paste. And again. And paste. So,
How often do you save while you're doing this?
every
few minutes.
every
couple
cut
frames.
Right.
it's very difficult to get back into one you've saved and continue. Like
Yeah,
I
if
said.
you're gonna undo something, you might undo the whole thing.
Yeah, I always save all the time. Been hurt way too many times in my life not to do that. Yes.
Then, PPP claims that they use a program, obviously it's a program they developed, that is based on different grades of gray. Do you know anything
Yeah,
about
that's a displacement map.
Oh,
No, I don't. I have so many doubts
Tell
about
you
its
about
ability
how
to
you
be
use it.
functional. I can't even begin to tell you. Because then you're letting the computer do all of that blending for you, and I can't imagine that it's as realistic as I would want my images to be. Might work, and then maybe someday I'll try it, but for now this works fine. And this is actually a little more fun because I get to say, I did it. Any other questions? Yes?
And the last picture that you showed for the yearbook, high resolution, what was the file size of that?
That particular JPEG with compression was 550K.
550K.
The original file that I sent back to them probably was about 80 meg. So they're fairly large.
And that was 7,000 pictures with,
I don't really know how big it was.
oh, okay.
I'd have to go back and
Did
look
you
at it to tell
scan
you.
photographs in this, or did they send you to?
That's all I did.
So they gave you photographs that you scanned, and then you did the work.
I
and
scanned them
sent
at 100% size. So if it's a 6x4, 100% 6x4,
600 DPI.
at 600 DPI.
back. So you got nice big scans.
Huge. And then I spent the first hour and a half getting lint off the pictures,
Yeah, oh, sure.
getting rid of the imperfections that were introduced during development, and getting it as clean as possible before I started messing with it, because the last thing you want is a piece of lint that shifts from one layer of depth to the next. So. Yes?
Yeah, but
Since it takes
you
such
can't
high
copy
resolution,
my
is this
images.
something
I
that can
can't
be
send
converted
it.
and then shown, for instance, in a newspaper? If I wanted to apply this towards an ad that I was running,
Absolutely.
the newspaper can handle that?
As long as they can handle the color printing and keep the colors consistent enough.
Would it do in black and white though?
Well, if you're doing a black and white pair, sure. But then how are the viewers of the newspaper going to be able to see the 3D image?
So it would have to be closed, but the newspaper, the residential newspaper would.
Yeah, I don't see why not.
It was a newspaper, it wasn't 3D, was it? I never saw it, I heard that's called.
I was sitting on my,
Do you think it worked?
it seems okay.
Yeah, maybe we should wrap up.
Yeah, I'm ready to wrap it up. That's it. Everything has been presented.
Now that we have had the right flowers, the knot is tied. Why, I can visualize such happy hours close by your side. The honeymoon in store is one that you'll adore. I'm gonna take you for a ride. I'll go home and pack my clothes. You go get your these and those, and away we'll go. On off we're gonna shuffle, shuffle off to Buffalo. To Niagara in a sleeper, there's no honeymoon that's cheaper, and the train goes slow. On off we're gonna shuffle, shuffle off to Buffalo. Someday the stork may pay a visit and leave a little souvenir, just a little cute. What is it? But we'll discuss that later, dear. For our little silver quarter, we can have the Pullman porter turn the lights down low. On off we're gonna shuffle, shuffle off to Buffalo.